So I just beat Elden Ring Nightreign, and it took me around 13 hours. Generally speaking, I've got like over 500 hours in the base game of Elden Ring, so a lot of the mechanics and bosses weren't too hard for me. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I was playing with a group of people that actually knew what they were doing, but I think I can still confidently say that Nightreign is definitely easier than base Elden Ring. It just requires that you put in the necessary amount of time to get a better understanding of what you actually need in order to win. But being that this is a multiplayer game, if you get downed, you can actually just get rezzed by your buddy if they smack you hard enough. So for starters, Elden Ring Nightreign is kind of just a side project. It's not made by Miyazaki, it's actually made by a different director. I think it's really interesting and risky that a AAA studio is actually trying to kind of break the mold and do something that is unexpected. I much prefer that a game like Elden Ring Nightreign exists over just some other AAA slop. Still, there is a part of me that is slightly concerned, just because what Nightreign kind of represents is the studio testing the waters for some sort of extraction-esque Souls-like. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the core gameplay loop. Basically, you'll pick an expedition, which is the main boss of the run. You'll be thrown into a map where you have 3 total in-game days to get yourself strong enough to fight that expedition boss. So there'll end up being these points of interest on the map that you and the other players have to decide, okay, I want to go here because this seems like it's going to end up having a potential holy weapon. It doesn't necessarily mean that a weapon will drop for your character, but it might end up having a passive that's worth having the weapon in your inventory for. Because you actually keep the passive of any of the weapons that you have in your inventory, unless it has this hand, then it means it needs to be an offhand or a main hand weapon. But it was really strange to me that nowhere in the actual game did it explain this, even in the tutorial codex. I actually learned it from you guys, which means that the game would have actually been a lot easier for me because I only learned of this on the final run of the game. What this means is that there's a little bit of strategy involved with how you end up building your character, because each of the expedition bosses will have a specific weakness, which means that you basically want to stack as much damage of that specific type as possible throughout your run. But okay, anyways, as you're going to these different locations on the map, some of them you want to avoid until day 2 comes around. Because at the end of day 1, you'll be challenged with fighting a boss, and the game will force you to fight these bosses with a Fortnite Battle Royale fog that rolls in and kills you if you don't stay out of it. The bosses themselves are like a DPS check. You gotta make sure that you're a high enough level and have good enough gear to be able to defeat it. Then you'll go into day 2, the fog will roll back, and now that you're a stronger level, you can start exploring some of the higher tiered areas. It's not that you can't go to these areas in day 1, it's just not necessarily recommended. But this is where problems kind of start to set in because the game can become ridiculously repetitive. The point is, once you kind of figure out what you're supposed to do in this game, you kind of just keep doing the same thing every run, which isn't something that was a game breaker for me, and I'll talk about why in a moment, but I did think that it was worth pointing out because I've seen a lot of people's complaints around the repetitive nature of the game. Like, you will end up unlocking some different biome generation, like one run might have a volcano, one might have a swamp, but generally speaking, every single expedition has the same core map, with the only thing changing being the loot at specific locations. But okay, let's assume that you end up getting to the end of day 2, beating that boss, and then you are thrown into day 3, which is the expedition fight. While the bosses within days 1 and 2 are just going to end up being repeat battles from Elden Ring or Dark Souls or just bosses taken from other games, the day 3 expedition bosses are all new and unique, and I loved every single one of them. Some more so than others. But while this is the part of the game where a lot of people will be like, oh my god, this is so difficult, I found that all you really gotta focus on is getting your entire party to level 13 or 14 by the time you get to day 3, and you should be good so long as you have at least someone in the party with the boss's weakness weapon. And the reason why I'd say Nightreign is easier than base Elden Ring is because there's not really any build variety per se. Yes, the different equipment that you have kind of lets you build your character, but I'm talking in a more traditional sense. When you go to a site of grace, you simply level up and the stats are allocated automatically. And this in turn is my favorite aspect of Nightreign and why the repetitive nature of the game doesn't really get tiring for me. You see, being a freak that's spent over 500 hours in the base game of Elden Ring, I've gone through that game, New Game Plus, so many times. And what eventually happens when you've replayed the game that many times is you'll notice certain areas of the game being your favorite and other areas of the game being a slog. I always loved going through Godric's castle, but once I was finished it, I knew that I had to then beat the entire game if I ever wanted to try it again. Nightreign doesn't have that problem, and in fact, it delivers the same sense of New Game Plus over and over and over again. The game is also played very, very fast, because as you've already seen with the footage, you can sprint all over the place and go up these super high jump geysers and everything. But one big negative point that I have towards this game is that so much of the content is recycled from base Elden Ring. You can sprint around like a madman, but you're still getting caught on a tiny rock because nobody bothered to smooth the terrain geometry. While the average player might be complaining about boss difficulty, I'm still here saying that the camera is the real boss. It has a mind of its own and it doesn't zoom out when you're fighting something bigger than your screen. Anyways, the main source of progression in the game is once you end up beating the boss or just dying on your run, you'll get sent back to the hub, at which point you'll be rewarded with some relics. These relics are pretty lame. Some of them are actually really impactful to your character, either giving you a specific class skill or giving you stuff like, oh, your starting weapon deals fire damage, which you can then stack with another relic that increases fire damage. This can be really helpful for a boss that you're trying to fight that has a weakness to fire damage, obviously. But I just hate the fact that the relics are just a whole bunch of random ass stones that you gotta siphon through. Each of the equip slots of your characters are color-coded, but you can at any point go to the shop to buy a couple extra slots that the game doesn't really teach you. You just gotta press down on the D-pad when you're equipping your character. Oh look, there's the other colors. But as you progress through the game, there's also Rememberances. These are kind of like class-specific quests, basically having you go and fight a specific enemy or kill a specific boss in order to end up getting a relic that is specifically chosen for your class. These are the most impactful because they might actually change the way that you play the game. But unfortunately, at the moment that I'm recording this review, the Remembrance quests are really, really bad just because the matchmaking is terrible. They have talked about how they're going to fix it in a future patch, but at the moment, it will take like 10 minutes plus to get into a Remembrance run, because it's trying to pair you with other people doing the same quest rather than just throwing you into a random run. Speaking of randoms, that's where this game can kind of be hit or miss for a lot of people. For me personally, the matchmaking is single-handedly why I enjoy this game so much, but it's also why I hate it. I love the idea that I can play with random people so quick and so easily, but it's a double-edged sword because the random people that you're with might confidently be incorrect about how to play the game. You do have the ability of pinging items, which is a pretty convoluted control scheme that's not really explained to the player, instead it's thrown into the codex. But if you're expecting an in-game chat, whether it be mic chat or text chat, it's not here. Still, Elden Ring Nightreign is one of those games that I wasn't really planning on getting. After my initial playtime with the playtest a couple months ago, I kind of felt pretty underwhelmed. But for whatever reason, the game just clicked with me this time. And I think the main reason for this is because of the extra classes. In particular, the Archer. Oh my god, I love this guy. Everybody else is maining the Archer because they can end up being at a range and it gives them more survivability. No, dude, I love being up close and personal with this guy. It makes it so fun. Because Archer wasn't really viable PvE in the base Elden Ring, it was more of a PvP weapon. So being able to play with a bow as my main feels fresh to me. And the classes in general feel very fresh, and I love it. Each of them has their pluses and negatives. Sure, there's certain classes that are just instantly better than others, but I think it's naive of people to assume, oh, the Revenant sucks, just because its base damage starts out really weak. Tell that to my buddy who mains Revenant and absolutely destroyed the final boss. Anyways, with this review, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail than I usually would. Normally, my reviews are usually like 3 to 4 minutes long, but I felt Nightreign was complicated enough that I needed to go into more detail, especially considering I have such a ridiculous amount of Elden Ring content here on the channel. As to my recommendation for the game, yes, I would highly recommend Elden Ring Nightreign. I think that for those of you where Elden Ring didn't really click, Nightreign will. And simultaneously, for those of you that loved the base game of Elden Ring, I think that you might have the same complaints that I do about Nightreign. But whether or not you let that disrupt your enjoyment of the game is kind of just personal preference. The game by no means is perfect, but as I said before, we need more AAA games that are experimentally weird like this.